This is the only footage I can show you because the rest is too gory for YouTube. It shows former cartel members Felix Gomez Garcia and Barnabas Gomez getting beheaded and chainsawed to death. Now, these two men worked for the ruthless Sinaloa cartel. It wasn't a life they chose, but one that poverty forced upon them. For decades, cartels and drug trafficking organizations have killed thousands of Mexicans and displaced millions from their homes. Around 450,000 Mexicans seeking to live above the country's minimum wage are employed by these organizations annually. Felix and Barnabas were also among the few brave ones, as they would smuggle small bricks of cocaine from Mexico to Phoenix, Arizona. And despite the minimal pay of around $21 per shipment, they did their duty diligently, until one incident changed everything. June 11th, 2006, Felix Gomez was arrested in Arizona for drug possession and subsequently deported back to Mexico. When he got there, he was reassigned to work with the Sinaloa cartel splinter group, Nueva Plaza. Felix then teamed up with his uncle, Barnabas Gomez, to work under this group. However, they made the fatal mistake of stealing from their boss, El Cholo, and paid the ultimate price, being killed on camera. With their backs against the wall and their torsos bare, Barnabas was the first to be beheaded with a chainsaw. His blood splashed all over his nephew Felix, who stayed still, knowing the same fate was about to befall him. But in his case, these cartel sicarios decided to step things up. Because he worked for him the longest, they made sure his death was slow and painful. They used a machete to cut off his head, but it wasn't quick. It took around 2 minutes, forcing Felix to feel life slowly slipping away before he finally passed on. August 2023, 5 male friends traveled to the Mexican state of Jalisco to attend a festival in the city of Lagos de Moreno, which is known as a hotspot for cartel violence. Unfortunately for them, they would end up getting kidnapped by these cartel hitmen. Authorities mounted a massive search for them, but before they could make any headway, a disturbing video was uploaded on social media. In this video, 4 men who wore the exact same clothing as seen in a photo taken by those 5 kidnapped victims were bound together, surrounded by cartel hitmen. One man, identified to be the 5th victim, was tossed a brick by those hitmen and instructed to smash one of his friends with it. Another victim was released and could be seen on video bludgeoning and decapitating one of his friends. The whole point was to make these 5 friends kill each other. But as bad as that may sound, it wasn't the first time cartel sicarios would pull off something that heinous. In 2010, the Zetas abducted men from dozens of passenger buses, forcing them to fight each other with sledgehammers. That resulted in over 100 men being killed. Most had their skulls crushed, and many were Central American migrants. And as for those 5 young tourists, their remains were found in this brick and concrete ranch building filled with bloodstains. Authorities would discover that uploaded video had the words Puro MZ watermarked on it, leading them to believe it was a reference to El Mayo Zambada, a top enforcer of the Sinaloa cartel who just got captured in the US. And on May 24th, 1993, Mexican Archbishop Posadas Ocampo was caught in a horrifying shootout conducted by the Tijuana cartel hitmen looking for El Chapo. These hitmen were at the Miguel Hidalgo y Costilla Guadalajara International Airport when they received intel from a secret informant that El Chapo was in a car in the parking lot awaiting his flight. These hitmen then charged towards El Chapo's supposed vehicle, blazing every part of it with gunshots to make sure that target was dead, but it just so happened that they targeted the wrong car. Inside wasn't El Chapo, but one of Mexico's most respected clergymen, Archbishop Ocampo. And by the time these hitmen realized it, it was too late. The Archbishop had already been shot 14 times, killing him instantly. And as for El Chapo, he was long gone. But there are a few twists to this story. First off, no one was ever convicted for this murder, though related charges were filed. Secondly, reports say many of the actual killers were from the Logan Heights gang in San Diego, even though the Tijuana cartel ordered the hit. 2 of their hitmen, Francisco Murillo Diaz and Edgar Nicolás Villegas, were identified as the masterminds behind the attack. And even though the murder happened in Mexico, the US charged 9 members of the Logan Heights hit squad, with 3 of them pleading guilty to their involvement and receiving between 18 and 22 years in prison. Back in 2023, a Californian family of 6 got killed by alleged cartel migrants in the US. But it wasn't just the brutal loss of life that shocked the nation, it was the horrifying, savage manner in which they were killed that left everyone wondering what must have happened that day.
This was clearly not a random act of violence. This family was targeted by cold-blooded killers.
Around 3:30 a.m. on the day of the incident, deputies at Tulare County, Goshen, California, responded to calls about a shooting happening just east of Visalia. By the time they got to that location, they found 2 members of this family dead on the streets with gunshot wounds in their heads. They went further and found a 3rd person fatally shot in the doorway, and 3 more victims were also found in the house, including a man who was still alive but later died at the hospital. 3 victims of this massacre were underage, and 2 women would survive the attack by hiding in a nearby trailer. A few days later, 35-year-old Angel Uriarte and 25-year-old Noah Beard were identified as the shooters. They were members of the Norteño gang, a wing of Mexican drug cartels in the U.S., while the targeted family were said to be members of the Sureños gang, a group loosely connected to the Mexican Mafia prison gang. Now, both these gangs have been in a bloody turf war for years, but in the end, the victims were just one more group caught in the relentless cycle of violence that has claimed countless lives. Now, one of the shooters, Uriarte, got injured in the shootout, and after he was hospitalized, law enforcement linked him to the massacre. He was subsequently arrested, with cops finding drugs, multiple assault weapons, and dozens of ammunition stashed in his home. This was the iconic moment Chalino Sanchez received a death note during his last performance in Mexico. In fear, he wiped the sweat off his forehead and looked around before he continued singing, and just a couple of hours later, he was killed. In 1975, when Chalino was just 15 years old, his sister was kidnapped and then by several men before she was sent home naked. In turn, Chalino sought revenge by killing one of the men responsible at a party. He became wanted for this murder, leaving him with no other option than to run away from Mexico and start a new life in Los Angeles, California. He would join one of his brothers in dealing small quantities of cocaine. In just a couple of months in business, he was arrested and deported back to Mexico, where he served an 18-month jail term. Now, while he was in jail, Chalino started writing narco corrido songs, glorifying the life of drug traffickers. I mean, it was controversial, but at that time, very few artists were doing such, so it made him very famous within the perimeters of his cell. Now, once he got out, he traveled back to LA, where he hired a band and began recording music to play at different venues around the city. So by the mid-1980s, Chalino had become a household name in Mexico and California, but his genre of music was disliked by rivals of the drug lords he glorified in his songs. There had been multiple attempts on his life, and he knew in some way these drug lords were eventually gonna get him. May 15th, 1992. Despite warnings from his family, friends, and even death threats, Chalino went ahead to perform at Salon Bougainvillas in Culiacan, and what seemed like deja vu, a fan pushes their way to the front of the stage to hand Chalino a song request. But from the look on his face, it wasn't a request. It was a message informing him that his performance there would be his last. You can see the fear on his face as he read that note. Regardless, he continues singing, and after the show, he left with 2 brothers, a cousin, and several young women. On their way home, they were stopped by some Chevrolet Suburbans claiming to be police. One of these men flashes his badge and said to Chalino, "My comandante needs you." Chalino and his brothers tried to offer the men some money, since it wasn't uncommon for Mexican police to accept bribes, but unfortunately they refused their offer. Chalino gave himself up to these men and they drove off with him. 12 hours later, 2 farmers find a man in a ditch with rope marks around his wrists and 2 shots to the back of the head. Law enforcement was called to the scene, and the dead body was identified as Chalino Sanchez. Now, Chalino's story is just one example of the deadly risks in Mexico's drug world, a danger that also took the life of another key figure. Enrique Kiki Camarena, a dedicated DEA agent, found himself in the crosshairs of Mexico's most powerful drug cartels in the 1980s. Camarena's mission was to dismantle the burgeoning drug trade that saw this unrelenting flow of narcotics into the U.S. And his mission was successful to some degree, but he paid the ultimate price, his life. Kiki's breakthrough came when he uncovered a massive marijuana plantation known as Rancho Buffalo, owned by the notorious Guadalajara cartel, valued at an estimated $8 billion. Its destruction dealt a significant blow to the cartel's operations. However, the victory painted a target on his back. The cartel leaders, Miguel Angel Felix Gallardo, Ernesto Fonseca Carrillo, and Rafael Caro Quintero, saw Camarena as this existential threat that needed to be eliminated. So now it's February 7th, 1985. Camarena steps out of the U.S. consulate in Guadalajara, heading to meet up with his wife for lunch. But he would never make it because he was abducted in broad daylight by corrupt officials working for the cartel. Blindfolded and handcuffed, he was taken to a clandestine location where a grim fate awaited him. Over the next 30 hours, Camarena was subjected to relentless torture. The cartel interrogated him, seeking information on DEA operations and his informants. They would beat him with a tire iron, burned him with cigarettes, and even administered drugs to keep him conscious throughout this harrowing ordeal. He had broken ribs, his skull was crushed, and that's just a few of the numerous other injuries. But even through all that pain, Camarena didn't crack, just proving his courage and toughness to get the job right up until the end. Camarena's body was discovered a month later, buried in a shallow grave. The brutal nature of the death sent shockwaves throughout the DEA and U.S. government, sparking Operation Leyenda, possibly the largest DEA homicide investigation ever. This operation went after the Guadalajara cartel and managed to bring many of its leaders to justice. But it wasn't without a long and tough fight. May 14th, 2020, Mexican drug lord Jose Rodrigo Arechega Gamboa, better known as El Chino Antrax, was killed by a Sinaloa cartel hit squad while on house arrest. You see, a few years earlier, Gamboa led an armed group called Los Antrax, providing security for Ismael Zambada. Now, his hit squad became infamous for their brutal killings and unimaginable methods of torture. El Chino would even flaunt his exploits on social media, chasing fame. But his luck ran out in December 2013 when he was arrested at an airport in the Netherlands. Authorities were able to identify him through his flashy Los Antrax diamond ring. So in January 2014, he was extradited to the U.S. to face drug trafficking charges. And after a year of legal battles, Antrax pled guilty in March 2015 and received a surprisingly light sentence of 7 years and 3 months, sparking rumors that he cut a deal with authorities. Even more shocking was when he was placed under house arrest in lesser time, making the Sinaloa cartel not just lose trust in him, but put into motion his assassination. May 6, 2014, while Chino was still serving his sentence, his wife was kidnapped, assaulted, and bludgeoned to death. Authorities later found her lifeless body in her home. Then, once Antrax was granted house arrest, he went to stay with his sister. But one night, while having dinner with his sister and her husband, a Sinaloa hit squad busts in and a fierce firefight erupts, with Chino fighting back with an assault rifle. The shootout lasted until dawn, but when Chino and his sister ran out of ammo, they surrendered and were killed like dogs. The following day, cops found their bodies in a trunk of a black SUV parked at an isolated location. El Chino's assassination tells us that betraying a cartel is one mistake no one ever really comes back from, a mistake that Jose Daniel Gonzalez Galena also paid with his life. May 15th, 2009, cartel hitman Gonzalez Galena was shot 8 times at point-blank range outside his home in El Paso, Texas. Why? Well, he crossed the Juarez cartel, and they weren't exactly the forgiving type. The Juarez cartel, known for pushing marijuana, cocaine, and heroin into the U.S., used to be one of Mexico's big bad wolves. But after a series of arrests, deaths, and internal drama, their reputation took a hit. Now, Galena wasn't some big-shot drug lord, but he was a sicario, an enforcer for the top dogs. So when ICE dangled a shiny new life in front of him for his wife and kids in Mexico, he caved and spilled the cartel's secrets almost instantly. However, as soon as he started that new life in El Paso, the Juarez cartel learned about his betrayal and decided to seek revenge. Ruben Rodriguez Dorado, also a lieutenant in the Juarez cartel, was tasked with the assassination of Galena, and after receiving orders from superiors, Ruben entered the U.S., pulled some strings to get Galeana's address, and employed a group of young thugs to get the job done. Galena was chilling in front of his swanky El Paso house when teenage hitmen sneak up on him and shoot him dead. The shots were so close that the bullets passed through his body and hit the neighbor's house. His wife and 2 kids were inside, heard the shots, and fled through the back door. And of course, Galena didn't survive, but the twist to the story is that the guy who ordered his assassination was also working for ICE. Now, Mr. Dorado never got hit with any charges, but the teenagers he hired are rotting away behind bars as we speak.
At an exclusive shopping center in South Lake, what we've learned about the suspect vehicle and the victim's possible ties to the Mexican drug cartel.
Picture this. It's 6:30 p.m. on May 22, 2013. Juan Jesus Guerrero Chapa and his wife arrive at South Lake Town Square in their elegant 2012 Range Rover, prepared for an evening of shopping. It's a normal, cool evening, and everything's going pretty well. Now, what they don't know is that their fancy ride has a hidden GPS tracker underneath it that has followed their every move for weeks. Fast forward a few minutes later, and a rented Toyota Sequoia pulls up nearby, parked perfectly to keep an eye on their Range Rover. And at around 6:47 p.m., the Chapa couple head back to their car when suddenly, a guy in a hoodie with a bandana over his face jumps out the Sequoia and opens fire, taking out Chapa right then and there. This just so happened to be the first murder in that city since 1999, and the first time a cartel member turned informant got killed on American soil. It also turned out that Mr. Guerrero Chapa was living a double life, one as a part-time lawyer for the Gulf Cartel's big boss, Ociel Cardenas Guillen, and also as a part-time informant for the U.S. government. Chapa started off as a regular middle-class kid from Nuevo León, Mexico, but by 2001, he caught the eye of U.S. agents when he became the go-to lawyer for the Gulf Cartel's former leader, Cardenas. By 2013, Cardenas had been arrested and extradited to the U.S., and so, since Chapa represented him during his trial, U.S. agents saw him as their golden ticket to the cartel's inner circle. After Cardenas' sentencing, they got Chapa to flip sides, aiding him to recover over $50 million contributed by leaders of Los Zetas, which was still under the control of the Gulf Cartel. The Zetas thought the money they handed to Chapa would buy Cardenas some leniency and set him free, but that certainly wasn't the case. Feeling double-crossed, the Zetas blamed Chapa for the whole mess and went on a rampage, declaring war and causing chaos along the border. Chapa, fearing for his life, fled to the U.S. with his family, but his freedom didn't last long. By 2011, Chapa was living the good life in a $1.2 million South Lake home, hiding under the name Magialeli Diaz Tizira. Although he was under the radar, he just couldn't get out of that cartel game. He kept working for the Gulf Cartel while feeding info to the DEA, double dealing at its finest. And despite having 20 legit businesses in the U.S., his greed kept him tied to the cartel, which ultimately led to his downfall. In January 2013, the Zetas, hungry for revenge, hired a mercenary named Rodolfo Villarreal Hernandez, aka El Gato, to hunt Chapa down. El Gato and his squad would use burner phones and rental cars to track Chapa and his family. They finally planted a tracker on his car and followed him back home. But instead of murdering him at his house, they chose to do it in public. And after that hit, El Gato and his crew tried to make a run for it, but got nabbed at the border with 3 trackers on them.
Mi nombre es Carlos Enrique Sánchez Martínez, alias el Cholo, originario de Guadalajara, Jalisco.
March 18th, 2021, a video was posted on social media featuring Carlos Enrique Sanchez, aka El Cholo. Here we can see him sitting in a white chair with armed men behind him. He proceeds to say a few things before the video's cut short, and just a few hours later his body's found stuffed in a plastic bag with cardboard signs declaring him the traitor, El Cholo. Now, El Cholo wasn't just any guy, he was a top drug lord and the head honcho of the Nueva Plaza Cartel in Guadalajara, Mexico. And before he ran the show, he was El Mencho's right-hand man of the CJNG. Together, these two orchestrated some of the most brutal attacks in Mexico. Yet, while playing the loyal lieutenant, El Cholo was secretly pulling off heists and keeping the loot for himself. So in 2017, things went south when El Cholo allegedly ordered a hit on the CJNG financial operator who snitched on him to El Mencho. Once his dirty deeds were out in the open, El Cholo had to bail from the cartel, but instead of laying low, he shocked everyone by forming his own gang, the Nueva Plaza Cartel, with backing from the Sinaloa Cartel, one of CJNG's biggest rivals. So that sparked a bloody war in Guadalajara, covering the streets in blood and bullet casings. The violence was so bad that, at a certain time, Jalisco accounted for over 20% of all disappearances in Mexico. And it was at this point that El Mencho finally decided it was time to remind everyone who the boss was.
Igual yo mandé a aventar la granada ahí al consulado americano igual le di la orden a Marino para que matara a las 11 personas que fue hace poco en ahí en la colonia La Jauja.
As you saw in the video, Sanchez was sitting in a white lawn chair, rocking a red Lacoste t-shirt, surrounded by masked camo-clad guys with big guns, likely from CJ&G. El Cholo, clearly not having a good day, seemed to be reading from a script. He confessed to several violent incidents in Guadalajara and named top cops he worked with, including Omar Garcia Harfuch, a controversial figure who survived an ambush by alleged CJ&G gunmen in June 2020. And like we said, a few hours after that video dropped, a body, wrapped in plastic bags and pinned with signs saying the traitor El Cholo, was left on a park bench in Tlaquepaque. Authorities later confirmed it was El Cholo's body, and while no arrests were made, the message from El Mencho was loud and clear: defy him and face a brutal end. May 15th, 2017, Valdez Cardenas was brutally shot 12 times by an unidentified gunman in Culiacan, Sinaloa. His death marked the end of decades spent trying to expose the Sinaloa cartel and all its operations. But how did it come to this? Born April 14th, 1967, in the same city he was killed in, Cardenas grew up amidst the violence of the area. Cocaine, meth, kidnapping, human trafficking, you name it. Throughout the 90s, he worked with several news stations, but wasn't satisfied with their approach to covering criminal organizations. They weren't corrupt, just too cautious for Cardenas. So he started his own newspaper, Rio Doce. Rio Doce was both a blessing and a curse for Cardenas. On one hand, he's showing some of the deepest and dirtiest secrets of organized crime, and on the other, these people want to kill him. Despite that, though, he didn't stop. He published several books on drug trafficking, including internationally recognized Miss Narco, which detailed the horrors faced by the girlfriends and wives of Mexico's biggest drug lords. In September 2009, unidentified assailants threw a grenade in Rio Doce's offices, causing significant damage. Thankfully, no one was injured. This attack came after Cardenas published Hitman, Confession of an Assassin in Ciudad Juarez, which caused a huge stir in public opinion. Remarkably, though, he continued to expose these criminals without fresh attacks or death threats until he provoked the Sinaloa cartel once again. In 2011, Cardenas was awarded the International Press Freedom Award in New York. During his acceptance speech, he would condemn violence in Mexico and blame both the citizens and the government for driving the war forward. Well, that angered the Mexican government and the Sinaloa cartel, and it meant one thing and one thing only: Cardenas had to go. Around noon on May 15th, 2017, Javier Valdez Cardenas was shot 12 times. The attack was carried out just a few blocks from the Rio Doce office in Culiacan, Sinaloa. Also, Mexican authorities couldn't really link anyone to the murder, as no suspects, no leads, and no arrests were even made. Now in Tijuana, just south of the Californian border, Jesus Rey David Alfaro Pulido, a 26-year-old singer known as El Gallito, was found tortured and killed alongside two of his staff members. Alfaro was found with bullet shots to the head, and his manager, Israel Flores, and his assistant, Jose Guadalupe Topete, were also found dead. The deaths were linked to 3 other murders in Tijuana, including a municipal police officer. Many bodies bore signs of torture and had execution-style notes, signifying a cartel was responsible. But why was he a target? Well, just like other Mexican narco corridos singers, Alfaro was just one more in the list of those singers who faced a violent end. He was known for singing banda or grupero music in Tijuana nightclubs, and gained fame for covering Elizalde's songs, but never made a recording. In this chaotic shootout at a hospital in Culiacan on September 28, 2023, a Sinaloa cartel boss known as L22 was mistakenly killed by his own men, who thought he was a rival gang member. It's crazy, right? Let us explain though. L22 oversaw operations in Guamuchil for El Chapo's sons, the Chapitos. He'd come to the hospital to pay for the surgery of a fellow cartel member, Omar Silvano, who was wounded in this previous shooting. However, Silvano's guards mistook L22 for an assassin and opened fire on him. Dr. Odnel Montoya, a father of 2, was caught in the crossfire and killed. Silvano, already injured, was shot again and died after allegedly trying to grab a cop's gun during his transfer to another hospital. And a woman who had nothing to do with this was also injured by a bullet to the hand. In a tragic twist, one of the hitmen, realizing his mistake, tried to kill himself because he knew if his other bosses found out what happened, he was good as dead. While he didn't succeed, nothing has been heard of him ever since. Marisol Marcias Castaneda, known online as Nena de Laredo or La Nena de Laredo, was a Mexican journalist and editor in Nuevo Laredo, Tamaulipas, who didn't shy away from posting information about drug activities online. Now, this would bring a lot of attention towards her, especially from the very people she exposed. She got attacked for her work twice, in 2004 and 2006, but her luck ran out when the Zetas decided it was time to take her out. September 24th, 2011, after Castaneda published a bombshell expose on the Zetas' internal affairs, the cartel abducted, tortured, and then decapitated her. Her severed head was placed on the Christopher Columbus Monument in the bustling Paseo de la Reforma in Mexico City. Her body was just left nearby, accompanied by a keyboard, cables, discs, and a chilling note that read, "Okay, Nuevo Laredo en vivo and social media sites. I am Nena de Laredo, and I'm here because of my online reports and yours. For those who don't believe this happened to me because of my actions, for trusting in the Army and Marines, thank you for your attention. La Nena de Laredo." Marciano Millan Vasquez, a high-ranking member of the Los Zetas cartel, was involved in one of the cartel's most horrific acts ever. Back in 2013, Vasquez brutally murdered a girl by dismembering her with an axe and then burning her body in front of her parents. This heinous act wouldn't stop here. He would also kill the girl's mother in the same gruesome manner, while he forced the father to watch. And then finally, he killed the father as well. I mean, if you don't see that as demonic, we don't know what to say. This atrocity was part of a larger wave of terror, orchestrated by Vasquez and Los Zetas, that cartel notorious for its extreme brutality. The purpose was to instill fear and ensure the cartel's dominance was unquestioned. Vasquez's method of killing wasn't only about eliminating perceived threats, but also about sending that clear message to anyone who might have considered opposing or betraying their organization. Some might say this man deserves nothing short of a very painful death, but unfortunately for them, that's not how the legal system works. Vasquez was later captured and tried in the US. He was handed 7 life sentences, which means he's gonna spend the rest of his life behind bars. August 25th, 2011, just before 2 p.m., 12 Los Zetas cartel members, including one of their leaders, met at El Gran Pastor restaurant on Gonzalitos Avenue in Monterrey, Nuevo León. Now, during this special meeting, they received orders to attack the Casino Royale as retribution for the owner's failure to pay extortion fees. By 3 p.m., they left the restaurant and went to the Pemex gas station in the Valle Verde neighborhood to gather gasoline in large containers. Surveillance cams show 2 pickup trucks filling up these containers before heading towards the casino. And 50 minutes later, a convoy consisting of a Mini Cooper, a Chevy Equinox, a blue GMC, and a gray VW Beetle arrive at the casino. And then within the first minute and a half, 8 or 9 armed men storm the building and violence erupts. Although some had managed to flee, many innocent civilians hid in panic as one Zetas gunman would assault the receptionist with a rifle, while the others spread gasoline inside the premises. Panic ensued after as about 150 people, mostly women, tried to escape but found the emergency exits locked. The perpetrators ignited the gasoline and burned the whole place down. The fire trapped many inside, killing around 52 people from carbon monoxide poisoning as they hid in bathrooms and offices. Emergency services found bodies upon bodies piled up near bathrooms, stairways, and game tables. By the following morning, authorities confirmed the death toll to be around the 60 mark, with dozens more suffering life-altering injuries.